call to order the April 9th, 2018 regularly scheduled meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Yes. Commissioner Reynolds.
Present.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
Here.
Commissioner Stallman.
Here.
Commissioner Rudnicki.
Here.
Commissioner Bolt.
Here.
And Commissioner Breidenbach.
Present.
Sir, if you wouldn't mind moving over one chair, please.
Moving up in the world.
Oh, I moved up.
Uh-oh.
Play some music.
Before we go to the minutes to be approved, let me tell you what's on tonight's agenda. We've got some miscellaneous business matters to take care of. We'll then open it up to public comment on concerning items not on tonight's agenda. After that, we'll have comments and reports from staff and commissioners. We'll then go into a transitional PC meeting where we elect a temporary chair, and then we vote on a chair and a vice chair. Then we'll reconvene and go into our two issues tonight. So, approval of the agenda. Any changes in the agenda? Seeing none, move on. Minutes to be approved.
Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, go ahead. You're right.
Minutes to be approved. Do y'all have the minutes? Y'all watched online. Any changes, comments, or do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve, based on the recording secretary's certification, the March 12, 2018 action minutes for the March 12, 2018 regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote.
Trying to keep things moving.
I was not present for the meeting.
Right. John was not present at the last meeting, so we have 5 in favor.
Okay, 5 in favor, the motion carries.
Great. We'll now go into the public comment portion. That's where you can speak on items not on the two cases in tonight's agenda. You'll have anyone can express an opinion. We ask that you please be considerate and civil. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please give your name and address before you speak. When you have 30 seconds left, you will see a yellow card go up. When you have exceeded your 3 minutes, you'll be asked to stop. We have one person signed up, Pam Chadburn.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. So I have a question. I didn't hear you, Chair Rudnicki, say that new commissioners would be seated tonight. Are they going to be?
I'm sorry, what?
Are new commissioners? Wow. Are new commissioners going to be seated tonight?
New members will be seated tonight,
okay,
yes.
I kind of missed that in your summary of actions. So I wanted to make a comment about the way that I've seen Planning Commission operate for the past couple of years. And I've been attending those meetings. I've probably been at more than some individual board or commission members, and certainly more than anybody in the audience tonight, although I admit they may have watched TV. I've actually been watching longer than that for about 7 years on and off. My observation is that, and I'm very concerned about this, that we inherited great code. And one of the testaments to that is that people love Littleton, whether they live here, they rent here, they have small businesses here, they love Littleton. Our current code is robust and good. We inherited something great. When changes have been brought to this board or to City Council, what I have never heard from the presentations is a reference to the current code and why it is the way it is and what would be changed by the application. The thing that is brought to our decision makers is what the applicant brings to current code that says maybe we can get away with this by referring to these cherry-picked sentences. And there has been a presumption, a default, that if those are cited, then the decision makers approve. I'm going to suggest to you, planning commissioners, that even though this can be part of your authority and be legal, it is not the best thing for Littleton, and you as decision makers have the right to set that policy, and so does City Council. In fact, you have the obligation to do that. And so what the law says, or what you might be sued for, should not be your driver. In fact, our driver should be, I think, the default should be our current code. It is excellent code, and it has given us what we have, and people like it. You don't hear from all of those people all the time because they're happy and they don't show up and they don't know that what you do can change things drastically. But you should consider that, and you should value our current code as the default. And there shouldn't be an assumption that something's approved just because an applicant cites certain things. So I'm basing that off of years of observation, and it's a request that I have for you now and going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak that hasn't signed up? Seeing none, we'll move on to comments and reports. Staff? Nothing? Good. Commissioners? Seeing none, moving right along. We'll go into our transitional, PC meeting. First, we elect a temporary chair. We'll then adjourn. Introductions will be made for the new planning commissioners. We'll then have the election of officers, chair and chair pro tem, and then reconvene and go on to our cases. So I'd make a motion to appoint the recording secretary as temporary chair. I need a second.
Second.
We need to vote. All those in favor or against?
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
New temporary chair, go ahead.
All right.
I guess we have to adjourn, correct? We are adjourned.
That's 6. All right, so welcome to the commission, you three. In a moment, I will call the roll. I will then call for nominations for chair, not a motion, but nominations. This action does not require a second. After all the nominations have been made, I will offer the floor to each nominee to provide a brief statement. After all statements have been made, I will ask for a motion to appoint so-and-so as chair for a term of 1 year. A second is required, and then we'll do a roll call vote. This process will end when a nominee receives a majority vote of the Planning Commission, and then we'll repeat that for each nominated person. All right, so let's see. First, we'll do the roll call for this new Planning Commission. Commissioner Reynolds.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher. Here. Commissioner Stallman.
Here.
Commissioner Rudnicki.
Here.
Commissioner Bolt.
Here.
Commissioner Breidenbach.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Allman. And Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Okay. I'll now entertain nominations for chair. Again, not a motion, just nominations.
I nominate Mark Rudnicki for chair.
All right, so that's a nomination for Mark Rudnicki. Any other nominations for chair? All right, hearing none, I'll close nominations for chair. Mark, would you like to give a brief statement?
Well, I'd be excited to be chair once again. We have a full plate for the coming year. I'm quite excited to be getting started on the comprehensive plan, which we've needed to do for at least 15 to 20 years. Our comprehensive plan was last done during the Reagan administration. I think things have changed a little bit in Littleton since then. So I look forward to serving as chair, and I want to say that I've enjoyed working with Bruce as chair pro tem, and on all the help we've gotten from staff, and let's proceed to get busy this year.
All right, may I please have a motion?
Say it again? You need a motion?
Need a motion.
Yeah, I move to seat Mark Rudnicki as Planning Commission Chair.
Okay, in a second.
Second.
All right, and I'm going to call a vote. We won't be using the voting board. I'll call down each person's name. Commissioner Reynolds.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
Yes.
Commissioner Stallman.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudnicki.
Can I think about, no, yes?
Commissioner Bolt.
Yes.
Commissioner Breidenbaugh.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Commissioner Allman. Commissioner Coronado.
Yes.
All right, that's unanimous.
Thank you
Chair
all.
for another year. Thank you. All right, and now we will I'll entertain nominations for Chair Pro Tem.
I'll wish to nominate Bruce Stallman.
All right, nomination for Bruce Stallman. Any other nominations for Chair Pro Tem?
Any others?
All right. We'll close the nominations. Would you like to give a brief statement?
Well, most of you know I'm a man of few words. So I'll just ditto everything Mark said. Thank you.
All right, I need a motion.
You need a motion.
Yes, need a motion. I make the motion for Bruce Stallman to be Chair Pro Tem.
Second.
All right, now we'll vote. Commissioner Reynolds.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
Yes.
Commissioner Stallman.
Aye.
Commissioner Rudnicki.
Aye.
Commissioner Bolt.
Yes.
Commissioner Breidenbaugh.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Commissioner Allman. And Commissioner Coronado.
Yes.
All right, congratulations, Commissioner Stallman. You are our Chair Pro Tem for another year.
Thank you much.
Thank you. All right, now I'm done. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Rudnicki.
All right, do we need to reconvene, take a new vote for who's here? Or we can just continue?
Nope, that's it. This transitional part of the meeting is now over, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, we're back in business. Next item is public hearing, case number CDU 17-0002, conditional use request for a tattoo parlor at 1449 West Littleton Boulevard. Give you an idea of how we do this. First, we'll get a staff report. Commissioners will be able to ask technical questions of staff. The applicant then make a presentation. Again, we can ask the applicant questions. Then we will open it up to public comment. You'll have the 3 minutes to speak. Then the applicant can have any last comments or rebuttal. We'll close the public hearing, and then we'll have a discussion and take a vote. That's the procedure. Now, can we miss something?
Well, I need to make a statement.
Go ahead.
Before you get going, just FYI, for disclosure and transparency purposes, my day job is with ARC Thrift Stores as the Chief Financial Officer. ARC Thrift has a store right across the street from the location proposed here. In as much as I have a fiduciary responsibility to the company, I could theoretically have an interest in this outcome. I've disclosed this to the city attorney. I don't believe that my position with the company precludes me from lack of rendering an impartial decision based on the evidence that will be presented tonight, and therefore, while I'm disclosing the relationship, I'm not planning to recuse myself. So I wanted to make sure that was on the record. Thank you.
Carol, before you start, I need to ask, who has visited the site, and have you talked to anybody while you were visiting the site? Start down here.
No, I have not.
No, I have not.
You have not visited the site and not talked to anybody? Okay.
I drive by the site every day on the
Yes.
way to and from work, but did not make a special trip to visit the site.
I just drove by, didn't talk to anyone.
I'm familiar with the site. I have not spoken to anyone about it.
And I drive it every day and have not spoken to anybody since the formal submittal.
I guess I drove by the site on the way over here, but I didn't talk to anybody about it, and I didn't glance over even at it.
Likewise, I drove by the site today, however, I didn't stop or talk to anybody about the site.
I did visit the site, but did not speak to anybody.
Thank you all. Now, Carol, go ahead.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Carol Kuhn, representing Community Development. The item before you this evening is a request for approval of a conditional use permit, resolution number 04-2018, case number CDU 17-0002. I wanted to also get onto the record that several questions, or 2 or 3 questions have been submitted by a planning commissioner via email, and I will cover those in one of the later slides. So just wanted to let you know I will be covering that. Conditional uses are quasi-judicial decisions. Decision makers must base their decision on the facts presented to them during the public hearing and on the information in the official record, applicable codes, statutes, and court decisions. The application was properly noticed, mailed notice was sent, and 2 signs were posted on the property. After the conditional use public hearing, a sketch plan will be submitted and it will be reviewed administratively. The site is located at 1449 West Littleton Boulevard, and this is an aerial.
Can you get the TV going?
Oh, it's not working?
No.
I need to do. Help has arrived.
It's the cavalry.
What is it, a V signal for video is what we would send up? Is it working now, or?
It's warming up. We got it. Thank you.
Okay. So this, as I mentioned, the site is located at 1449 West Littleton Boulevard. It's an existing property. It is the building with the circles all over it with the architectural features, mid-century modern building. The size of the property is 0.487 acres, and the property is zoned B2 Community Business District. So I'm going to briefly run through the criteria and staff analysis next. In 10.8.1A of the city's zoning code, the conditional use section requires that the proposed use at the size and intensity contemplated at the proposed location will provide a development that is necessary or desirable for and compatible with the neighborhood and or the community. And all of the business activity will be conducted indoors. The applicant is proposing 1 to 2 clients per day, and thereby appointment only. Hours of operation are proposed to be between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Therefore, staff has determined that it does comply with this section of the code. 10.8.1B of the city's zoning code section requires that the use proposed will not be detrimental to the health, safety, and general welfare of persons residing or working within the vicinity or to property improvements or potential development in the vicinity. This is based on the nature of the proposed site, the pedestrian and vehicular traffic, landscaping, screening, unobstructed open space, and staff finds that this does comply with the code. All business, as previously mentioned, will be conducted indoors. With no exterior modifications proposed. Clients will be seen as by appointment only. 40 available parking spaces exist on site, and based on the 466 square feet, the applicant would be required to provide 2 parking spaces of the 40. 10.8.1c, the proposed use will comply with the applicable provisions of this title and code, any design guidelines adopted by the Planning Commission, and will not adversely affect the comprehensive plan. There were a couple comprehensive plan policies that were applicable to this. Policy 1.1, whether to provide an opportunity for residents to live, shop, and play where they work, and to shop, play, and work where they live. And comprehensive policy 1.5, in that that this is a service-based use and that it does serve a larger market, and therefore staff has determined that it complies with the code. There are also not any design standards for this area that have been adopted. There is a historical survey that's going on for Littleton Boulevard, but there is not an established historical plan for this yet. Nothing has been determined. It's just a study. So there are no design standards for this building. 10.8.2R of the City Zoning Code has specific requirements for a tattoo parlor, specifically that that no tattoo parlor may be closer than 1,000 feet from another tattoo parlor or body art studio within the city. And the Planning Commission may also apply conditions to reduce impact of the use and may include hours of operation, parking, outdoor lighting, and other security measures as conditions of approval. The applicant it's been determined that this proposed site is more than 3,000 square feet away from the businesses from the one tattoo parlor in the city, which is on Main Street. Therefore, it complies with the spacing requirement outlined in the code. One of the questions presented by the Planning Commissioner via email was, how does this travel with the land? What's the termination? How do you end a conditional use? And the code does require that, does specify how things are terminated. Any one of the following shall terminate the right to operate a conditional use. So if it's empty and not operating for more than 12 months, then it can terminate. And changing to a use permitted by right would then also terminate the conditional use. Discontinuance, as I mentioned, discontinuance of the conditional use for a period of 12 months, or violation of or a failure to comply with any of the approved conditions of approval that may be imposed by the Planning Commission at a public hearing would also cause this to be terminated. Staff finds that the conditional use permit for Kestrel Studios located at 1449 West Littleton Boulevard meets the criteria for approval in sections 10.8.1 A, B, and C and 10.8.2 of the city's zoning regulations, and the staff therefore recommends approval of resolution 04-2018. The applicant is here and has a brief presentation. Staff is available for any initial questions.
Questions of staff of a technical nature? Craig, we'll start with you.
Yes, a few questions. Thank you. First, the staff report says that there are 40 spaces on site. Just looking at the aerial photograph, it doesn't look like there's enough space on that one lot to have 40 existing spaces. However, the 1 to 250 ratio is 40 is much more than would be required. Do we know how many spaces are actually required?
According to the conditional use permit, 36 spaces are actually required, and parking is made available on an adjacent lot as well.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So they have 40 available for the site. 36 would be required. 2 would be required for the size of this this use.
Okay, so there's not 40 on site, but 40 are available.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think along the lines of the question that was by email, I had a similar question. If the applicant were to change the hours of use or the number of customers that they expect, would that affect the conditional use?
Only
They
if
have to
those
come
were-
back in and reapply?
Right, only if those were made a condition of approval. So right now, the applicant is just proposing that if the Planning Commission proposes to add conditions of approval that says it's limited to only those hours, then they would have to come back through, the applicant would have to come back through and amend the conditional use. The applicant was just providing that as information of what the intent is, but they're not actually conditions of approval at this point.
Thank you, Carol.
Jerry,
Just one clarification in that.
can you somehow get over there?
Let me scoot over there. Just asking for clarification in that, is this the only tenant in the building?
I believe there are other tenants in the building. It's, I think the whole building itself is, it's a 4,500 square foot building. And so there's other tenants in there. This used to be the site of a medical marijuana dispensary. And this is just a portion of that building, 466 square feet of the 4,500.
Okay, thank you.
Jason? Questions?
No questions.
Robin?
Just one question. So is this land use going to be for the whole building or just for the 466 square feet of the shop?
That depends on if you add a condition of approval. The way that staff has reviewed this project is that it could be for the entire structure, although the applicant is only requesting 466 square feet. If Planning Commission wishes to add a condition of approval that would limit it to only that 466 square feet, that is completely in your purview. It does limit the applicant, though, from expanding to a little bit larger area if you make it that restrictive to only 466. We had an issue that came up with the other tattoo parlor that was in downtown, and it was limited in size, and then when they wanted to expand, because this not only is a tattoo parlor, but it's an arts gallery as well. The applicant does art as well. So by limiting it to only that 466, it would limit the ability to expand if one of the two things caught on really well.
All right, and you couldn't have another tattoo parlor there because of the 1,000-foot
Right,
difference.
so it would just be this one use, this one tattoo parlor.
Thank you.
Bruce?
And I had sent an email to the city attorney just asking for an interpretation. 10-8-1 sub A talks about a proposed use at the size and intensity contemplated at the proposed location will provide a development that is necessary or desirable for and compatible with. So necessary or desirable and compatible with the neighborhood and the community. Steve, do you want to chat, just explain broadly what you came back with?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. In this case, desirable is not a term that we would find in the law dictionary. So what courts generally do is courts generally go to the regular dictionary. Merriam-Webster's happens to be my choice, but you could pick any of them. And in fact, I looked at a number of dictionaries just in case, for some reason, this would be a word that dictionaries would define differently, and they don't. Desirable is really defined as something that is necessary, attractive, beneficial. And so from a standpoint of the commission as a quasi-judicial body, you would simply take the record before you, and if you can find based on that record that, yes, this particular use is desirable, it would be well within your purview to approve the conditional use permit. And then certainly as a judicial body, you could impose any related conditions that you feel are necessary to ensure the compatibility of this particular use with the surrounding uses in the area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just wanted clarification on that, so that's all I had.
That's it?
Yeah, thanks.
David?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. You mentioned that there are no design guidelines for this site, but they're not planning on any changes to the exterior, correct?
Correct. That was one of the criteria that listed design guidelines, so I was just running through the criteria.
Okay.
And they're not proposing any exterior modifications at all, just utilizing the existing building.
Okay, and did I read that right, that they're not doing anything to the inside either? It's perfect for the studio as it is?
That would be covered under the building permit, but that would be a question that the applicant could answer, like what specifically they're doing for the interior.
Okay, I thought I read that they weren't doing anything to the interior, but, not that it's that important, but just wondered. Okay, thanks.
John?
I have no questions for staff.
Signage, that sounds like there'll be an additional review for that. Is that?
That's an additional separate permit, and that would be evaluated against our sign code. The applicant has indicated that they were not proposing any signage at the time of the application. Now, that's not, part of the conditional use permit at this time, so applicant could always apply at a later time for signage.
A question, one or two clients a day from 11 to 6 is fairly benign. Question is if let's say the applicant sells to another tattoo artist, they bring in 4 or 5 tattoo artists and have 10 to 20 clients a day, would that be permitted under this conditional use?
Without an additional condition of approval, the way the staff report is written is that it's just allowing for a conditional use for a tattoo parlor with no limitations on the hours of operation or the number of clients. So if it was broad like that, anybody else could come in, any other tattoo parlor could come in and occupy the space.
Okay.
Is that?
With the exception of the distance requirement.
Right,
so as
sorry.
long as additional folks come in who work for this company, then that is potentially an option.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Not an additional tattoo.
No, I'm sorry. You meant to occupy the space, right? If somebody else came into this space, as long as nobody else would be allowed on the outside within 1,000 feet of this one. But if someone else, if Melanie was no longer the renter and some other tattoo parlor came in and rented, if you didn't put a condition of approval on time, hours, and operation and all of that, then they could run the business in this same space, occupying the same area
I agree with
under
you.
the conditional use.
Mr. Chair, I want to weigh in on one thing here, which is certainly conditions such as time, hours of operation are very easy for us to enforce. My concern would be if we start getting the conditions such as how many tattoo artists you can have inside, that becomes very difficult for us to enforce because we simply cannot tell from the outside. If we say that you can only have 3, it's very difficult for us to know whether you have 3 or 4. So the one caution I would ask the commission is as you look at conditions, think about, and I'm happy to opine on whether I think we can actually enforce them. I would be very concerned if you had a condition on the number of tattoo artists inside.
I was just merely asking if we approve this, what are we approving? So
You have very broad discretion, but there are some that you would definitely give your city attorney some challenges.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you. Applicant, would you like to make a presentation? If you'd state your name and your address, please.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Melanie Steinway. My home address or address of proposed site?
Home address.
My home address is 756 South Sherman Street, Denver, Colorado, 80209. Let's see, where do I start? I've been a tattoo artist for about coming up on 4 years now. I went to college at the Rhode Island School of Design and graduated in 2012 with a BFA in illustration. I've lived in Denver for about 5 years now. The first 3 or so years that I was a tattoo artist, I worked at a shop called Urban Element Tattoo up in Rhino. My reasoning for transitioning to my own studio is that I speak with my clients exclusively via email. I have a really strong client base. I don't take walk-ins, and I don't really like a shop environment where there's a lot of people working around me. You never know who's going to be walking in. especially as a younger, more petite woman working in this industry. I'm completely self-sufficient in the way that I collect my clients, and I feel really lucky to have found this opportunity down here. The space that I'm renting out has hardwood floors and a sink already installed, which were two of the basic requirements for having a shop, so I had to make 0 modifications. There's just some furniture that I had to bring in. Because of my appointment only, no walk-in basis, I don't want any signage. I don't need people, coming in off the street being like, hey, tattoo. Because of the size of the space also, I could potentially fit one other person in the space with me to, help split rent. But it's not a space that could feasibly be having like 5 people working in there. Let's see what else. I did bring a flash drive that has some of my artwork on it. I'm kind of a little scared to use this computer here. Want me to help you? I think I got it. Let's see. I just have a couple examples of my tattoo work as well as my fine art. My work generally focuses on animals, plants, and nature, just the way I've always done it. Guess I can just leave these here for a second and go through them. So we've got a watercolor Fibonacci spiral. This is a species of cactus that grows on the Galapagos Islands. This is a woman's wedding bouquet. And here's just some of my fine art. I work in a variety of mediums. This is an abstract piece that I did about a year ago. I do a lot of design work also. These are both t-shirt designs I did for bands. I also do wood burning, and I also play music, so I sometimes do artwork on guitar bodies. There you go. And I think that's it. The 1 to 2 client thing is pretty regular for me. Actually, I usually only tattoo 1 client a day. If pieces are really small, sometimes I'll go up to 3. I would love everyone's flexibility in case I do take on one other person to be working with me there, because they might also just take 1 to 2 clients a day. And I'd also love your flexibility if down the road a slightly larger unit in the building does open up. It would be really nice to have the opportunity to move in there, since the place is very small. I'm usually in the shop around noon or 1 o'clock, and I'm out by between 5 and 7. I don't really like working when it's dark out, so I think that's it. I'm not sure what the next step is.
Thank you. Questions for applicant? Let's start down at this end.
How long does it take to ink a tattoo?
Depends how big the tattoo is.
So, if it's 2 clients a day, is it 3 hours per, or?
I like to be really kind on my hands and my wrist. I broke my wrist about 2 years ago. So if I'm tattooing longer than 6 hours a day, or like a session is longer than 6 hours, then I'll break it up into 2 3-hour sessions with a healing month in between.
And then tell me more. Do you feel like you said maybe you may expand? Is that sort of the goal, is to expand? And
no, not necessarily, not at all.
And then so the tattoo studio, and then also will you be selling fine arts there as well, do you think?
Yeah, I have some of my fine art up on the walls, and I have prints available for sale also. I have no plans of having employees or anything like that. I'm not really that sort of person.
So you mentioned you're self-sufficient on clients, so do you have like a website or other means to track clients in?
Yeah, I get most of my clients through Instagram or word of mouth. I also have a Facebook art page, a Tumblr. And yeah, that's where pretty much everybody comes from.
Okay, no further questions.
So you mentioned hours that were a little different than was in the packet, which said 11 to 6. And I guess we're not really bound by time at this point, but you said noon to 7 potentially. What's the latest that you would see yourself working, say, in the summertime when it's light until 9:30?
Is working defined as being within the space or being with a client?
Oh, being open for business, I believe.
I'm not sure how to define being open for business because I don't have people coming in without me knowing.
Right, but you're there
Yeah.
doing work with
Yeah.
people. Maybe somebody else is there with you.
Sometimes I might have a client leave at 5, but it takes me time to clean up, and then I might stay and do some drawing.
Right.
So sometimes I would probably not have a client be there as late as 7, but maybe sometimes I would walk out the door at 7. I usually have my appointments start at noon, but I really like to adhere to clients' particular schedules. So if they need to have something a little bit earlier, then I kind of like to leave that flexibility.
Yeah, okay,
On average, I'd say it's about noon to 5.
okay. All right, thanks.
Bruce?
What was the square footage of the space you're presently renting?
466 square feet.
And do you have any feel for what a larger space, if it became available, what the upper limit you might be interested in leasing would be?
I have no idea. I don't know what the other units in the building look like, or what I could see myself affording down the road.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Robin?
Do you know if there's any hours of operation for the building itself?
I don't know.
Nothing else?
No questions for the applicant.
Okay.
No questions.
Yes, I just have one or two questions. Are there any health department inspections that are required?
I have already passed my health inspection.
Okay, all right, okay, good. But that'd be probably regular, like annual, or how does that work?
Annual, yeah.
Okay, great. And then, and I think this is maybe a question for Carol or staff. The conditional use would apply to the tattoo parlor component, but is that also required for the art studio, or would you also be producing art there?
I produce art there also, but it's occupying the same room, so I don't know where that line is drawn.
And the art studio is a use that's permitted under the B2 zone district. So the only issue at hand right now is the conditional use. The applicant could occupy the space with an art studio without even coming through and just do a tenant finish on the building.
I noticed on your neighborhood meeting sign-up, you just had 2 people show up, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. What was the outcome of the meeting? What was the opinions of the 2 people that showed up?
They were really happy to have me in the neighborhood.
Okay, all right. I do have a question thank you. I have a question for Carol. Refresh my memory. Is conditional use forever? Is there a refresher vote taken every 5 to 10 years? What happens?
Well, it would continue as long as the use continued, or if the use did not continue for 12 months, then it could be terminated.
Okay, but if it's in continuous use, then there is no sunset clause or re-looking at the situation?
No,
Okay.
not according to the regulations.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant?
This is more of a question for staff. Could you talk about hours of operation a little bit? Are there limits on hours of operation for other uses in this zone district? For example, gas stations, convenience stores, retail outlets, barber or beauty shops?
No, unlike other jurisdictions, we don't have a limitation on 24-hour uses. It's just the use can operate. There's no use by special review or any conditional uses for a 24-hour operation.
Okay, thank you.
Can I expand? Sure.
Go ahead.
So could you just this is again for Carol, just related to my previous question, can you define hours of operation, how that, if somebody's in the space, that doesn't seem to me to be hours of operation. Like, she could be there much longer than her hours are. Does a client have to be in the space in this particular case?
Well, you could define it in the conditional use, but typically, if she has like customer hours, like you don't wander around this, the Littleton Cafe after it's closed, so they usually have an hours of operation, but it's usually when patrons are visiting, but there could be staff staying there later with her working. But as Steve mentioned, there's some things that become difficult to start monitoring. You don't want to impose a condition that's impossible to regulate as well.
Okay, thanks.
Like if I wanted to stay after my client left and work on fine art for a couple hours, which technically is like the art gallery side of it, would that be acceptable?
That would be completely acceptable because there is no hours of operation in the B2 zone district. Some codes say that you can't be open longer than 23 hours of operation or something like that because they have 24-hour use regulations. There's nothing like that for B2.
Go ahead.
It's for you, Carol, too. So you mentioned we have another tattoo on Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
Has that ever caused the city any problems?
Not that we're aware.
I'll answer it. Not that we're aware of, no.
Did you know how many artists are in that particular tattoo?
I do not. I believe the conditional use approval for that, it was prior to when existing staff was here, but I believe that was conditioned around the size, the square footage size of that facility.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant?
I think there's like at least 6 to 8 artists working at Think Tank downtown. It's much larger.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking really quietly. I visited Think Tank, your shop downtown that's on that second floor, and they have at least 6 to 8 artists working there.
Thank you.
It's much larger than my space.
More than 466, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll now open up the public hearing. To reiterate, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. When 30 seconds are left, the yellow card will be held up. When your 3 minutes are up, the red card will be held up, and you'll see the time here. We ask for civility. If you'll please state your name and your address. And we have the list coming down of speakers. Thank you. Now I should write this down. We have one name, Pam Chadbourne.
I'm kind of hoping the projection will show up.
Can the TV go on again? Okay.
There we go.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here in District 1. And actually, I forgot to explain my, I have a fat lip from, I wish I had an exciting story like having a fight in a tattoo parlor, but I don't. I was doing yard work and breaking an old dead branch, and there's a caution. You never use a knife toward yourself, and you should never break a branch toward yourself either. Nothing exciting, but anyway, just wanted you to know, nothing dramatic. I'm glad that staff mentioned the historic survey. And while I understand there is no design guidelines yet, it's, I think, incumbent on you to consider this area is under consideration for that and look toward that. And notice that in the flyer that announced one of the meetings on this almost a year ago, 2017, this building is actually featured in the upper left-hand corner for the flyer. It's a really important building in terms of the mid-century modern character of Littleton Boulevard. So I just wanted to be sure that everybody's aware of that and that we should have design standards and guidelines actually in work. I'm not sure why staff hasn't talked about those yet. Even though it's under consideration, you're the Planning Commission and you have a right to look at other things being considered for this quarter. That said, I don't see this use as described as a problem. And that's why, let me compliment you for your questions. You hit exactly the issue with this, which is adding conditions. And I don't think it's reasonable, or nobody's asking that you impose conditions that are unenforceable. So let's not go there. But you can totally say that the hours of use should be between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. or 10 p.m., which I think would fit with the character of the neighborhood and allow for expansion to a reasonable degree. You can also limit the square footage. If it grows beyond 1,000 square feet, then it should come back. I'm not sure about the signage, but I think that may be an administrative proposal, and you have every right to put a condition on that because this building could be ruined by signage. So you have a right to put a condition on that, and I think an obligation to the community to do so. So I ask you to place some conditions on this, as you are allowed by code to do, for the sake of the community and also for the future of this district, which could be, besides a historic district, a business district. It may not end up being driven by history. It may end up being driven by business. And so please think ahead and add some conditions to this approval. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else that wishes to speak that hasn't signed up? Seeing no rush to the rostrum, would the applicant like to make any other closing statements? You'll need to come up if you are.
Just regarding her note about signage, I have no plans to have any exterior signage. I don't need it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now close the public hearing. Motion, discussion, commissioners?
I move to approve PC Resolution number 04-2018, approving the conditional use request for Kestrel Studios at 1449 West Littleton Boulevard, in that it meets the criteria for approval, subject to that said use shall occupy a space in the facility less than or equal to 1,000 square feet.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussions? Any amendments?
I'm in agreement with the idea of limiting the square footage. I was, as we look at the application, this says it's a building of 9,010 square feet. I'm not comfortable with the idea of 9,010. Not to say that that's what would happen as from the present applicant, but if something happened, it turned over, someone else takes it. You know, you always have to be looking into the future of how that could affect your community. I was also thinking of 1,000 square feet as an idea. I'm not married to that. If others have other ideas, I don't want to necessarily limit perhaps the future of this particular studio. But I'm thinking if this is the tattoo aspect of it is the conditional use. If someone wants to increase space for the art studio, that's not limited by anything. So it would literally just be the tattoo studio part.
Other comments? Go down the line. Anything?
I would just add that I do agree that there should be a limit on the maximum amount of space. I think 1,000 is a reasonable amount. I think it's, for Pam's comment, it's an appropriate use of this building, even given its potential historic nature. I think the commission should consider adding some time limits during the day. I would suggest making them as broad as possible, assuming or understanding that there's residential nearby. Perhaps 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. would be a reasonable limit. As an alternate, I'm not going to formally propose that, but I'd suggest that be added as a condition as well.
Sure. Anything to add?
I agree with the 1,000 square foot condition. However, I think putting business hour conditions on a building that has multiple tenants is questionable. We don't really know what the other businesses are, nor the timeframes that they operate. So I would view that as a operational question for the property owner.
Anyone down this end?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about, I guess, putting conditions on hours of operation, but also thinking that, hey, what if this really takes off? And what if the fine arts drawings, and what if we have Art Friday down there? And so if we want Art Friday at 6:30, you're going to be limited to do that. So I'm thinking that not to limit hours.
John, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with the limits on the square footage, however, not putting restrictions on the hours.
Yeah, I guess I just thinking about doubling the size of the tattoo parlor, I don't think that would be a problem. And, you know, for any larger space, the applicant or another applicant could come forward and, you know, put in another application for a larger space and basically make the case for that larger space. I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't think if we did put hours of operations on, I think it would be specific to the tattoo parlor portion of it, not necessarily the art gallery portion. As was stated before, I think that the 1,000 square feet probably does not extend to the art gallery, so she could probably have another space or an addition to the space that would exceed 1,000 square feet that would just contain the fine art portion. At least that's from what I'm hearing. That would be the case. So I guess I'm okay with it how it is right now.
Go ahead.
Jocelyn, I wanted to ask, this is it is a nice, the building facade, the building itself is a nice example of mid-century modern. And is it governed by, it's not in the historic district, I assume it's not an historic structure for purposes of HPB, Historic Preservation Board oversight, is it?
I'm going to step in here for a second.
Please.
This is outside the record. This is not part of the historic district. There's been nothing presented in the record. You're limited on a quasi-judicial to only what's in the record. You can't consider that.
Thank you much.
Anybody left out? Jason, do you have any comments?
I'll just say I agree with the folks who have talked about the 1,000 square feet being offering some opportunities for expansion, and hopefully should this be approved, the applicant is able to find success and perhaps be able to use that extra square footage. As you may have inferred from my questioning of staff on the hours of operation of comparable uses in the district, I'm not necessarily supportive of limiting hours of operation. I think the clients and the building management would largely take care of that.
I'm also in favor of the limit on square footage, 1,000 square feet versus what she's requesting. And it's not part of your motion that we limit hours of operation, so that's not to be considered unless we have an amendment, which we don't have. Any other comments? Seeing none, time to vote. Set.
The vote's unanimous and the motion carries.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break here and then resume with our next case. So 5-minute break. Next order of business is PC Resolution 09-2018, an ordinance to amend Title 10, Chapter 9, Plan Development Overlay, and Chapter 2, Zone Districts. Before we begin, everybody's driven the site. Is there anybody that has talked to anybody about this subject since the application was officially made? Don't see anybody nodding their head yes, so can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Commission. Jocelyn Mills for the Community Development Department. And what we are here to present to you this evening is some proposed changes to Chapter 9 and Chapter 2 in our zoning code. I want to quickly, however, turn it over to the city attorney first to introduce the concept of what is a PDO.
Can we get the volume turned up a little bit?
Yeah.
It seems like we're having a hard time, at least I am, I won't speak for anybody else, having a little hard time hearing.
I'm going to speak really loud. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, when we think of zoning, what we really have is we have two really very traditional types of zoning. The one type commonly, if you were in college working on your planning degree, we would call it Euclidean zoning from a case called City of Euclid, which went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that concept was that we would have straight zoning districts. You would have a residential zoning district, it would have property development standards, and it would be mandatory, and you could not do anything different than what that district is. And for many, many years, that was the structure of zoning. In the 1960s and 70s, it began to be recognized that that really did not work very well, created sort of what we might describe as cookie-cutter developments, that you could not do anything different. The law mandated everything within a very particular straitjacket, and that was your only choice. So as a result, the concept came up of what we call planned development districts. Now, I would tell you the Littleton Code is rather unusual in that it kind of confuses planned development districts, planned overlays, and kind of confuses it all. So it's very difficult sometimes to follow. What you would normally have is you'd have a single planned development district. In this city, we have planned development commercial, planned development industrial, planned development residential, and planned development sort of everything else. That's not what you normally would have, but we do. And what the idea there would be is that instead of having any standards, you would negotiate with the city what the standards of the zoning district would be. Now, independently of that, Littleton has this other rather unique district called a planned development overlay. Now, what we need to do is step back first and talk about what an overlay really is, and then how this differs. Now, if you were writing a modern zoning code, an overlay is a graft that we put on top of an existing zoning district with additional standards because of certain unique features. For example, in some cities, you would have a historic development overlay. You might have a downtown design overlay. You might have a river corridor overlay. And each of these overlays, districts, graft on an additional set of standards on top of the underlying zoning. The PDO right now doesn't do that. That's not how it works. Instead, you get a planned development overlay, and you can proceed to avoid all of the minimum standards of the underlying zoning district. It is literally the exact opposite of how an overlay would work under a modern zoning code. Because instead of it being a graft on top of the underlying zoning that stays in place, this is a graft that allows you to sweep the whole thing away and replace it with an overlay, what it calls to be an overlay. It really isn't. And so why are we here tonight is because as we've worked through this code, we recognize it doesn't function like an overlay. It doesn't look like an overlay. It doesn't work like an overlay. And so we have tried to address it and make sure that the underlying intent of the zoning code is carried forth. The idea that you would have minimum standards and you would graft on additional things on top of the minimum standards, not sweep the minimum standards out the door. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jocelyn, and she can get into the real nuts and bolts of this.
One question. You're proposing to eliminate the planned overlay for residential districts, but not commercial. Why?
Yes. And the idea was, and again, Jocelyn, I'm sure we'll get into this in much more detail, the planned development overlay was used in the residential districts in some respects because people couldn't craft in to the residential districts the types of development that they were using. That's why we've gone into Chapter 2 and made those amendments. And I know Jocelyn's going to talk about that in a lot more detail, and so the lawyer's going to stay out of the planning business and let her do that.
Only other quick clarification, and this is much louder, is that also remember that a planned development, that is approved by City Council. So that's like for your rezonings and for your, that's basically what you're doing, creating the zoning for that property through the PD regulations. And the PDO, Plan Development Overlay, comes to Planning Commission, and it's really around design and flexibility for that. So the reason we're here this evening, and I'm going to get into that in a second, the specifics, but as you know, working with the City Attorney's Office, the planners and I are working through what are the changes we can make within development standards to make a more workable code. So that is why this is before you, and we'll get to that in a second. Recognizing that the bigger topics around uses and district performance standards, we will get into that. But to Mark's point earlier in this meeting, we are working on a vision and updating the comprehensive plan. So those are two elements that really need to be put in place before we can have those larger conversations about are the uses appropriate, and within each of the zone districts are the requirements appropriate within each of those areas. So tonight, the purpose of this presentation and this proposal is for what is on the slide. There's a few things. First, we do recommend that we remove the option for a planned development overlay in our residential zone districts. And why? Well, it came to our attention several months ago when in speaking to a developer, they were interested in doing a rather large project in the R2 zone district. And upon looking at that, they did potentially have an option to do it through a PDO, but the surrounding land uses were all small single-family homes, and this was going to be a rather large project in that area. And one thing that in our existing comprehensive plan and in conversations we've had about, making sure we're keeping and protecting the residential character of our neighborhoods, we really felt that probably wasn't an appropriate option. So that's why, one of the reasons why this is before you, to remove residential out of the PDO. That does have some consequences, however, and so some of the specifics about what we want to add as far as zero internal lot lines as a result of that, because right now the only way that you can do a 2-unit attached product or a townhome, when that's allowed in our zone districts, is through a PDO. So second bullet point up here, one of the other things that we struggle with in our code today, as you know, is around parking. And so we do want to eliminate the option to reduce parking through a planned development overlay. In Littleton's code, you cannot request a reduction in parking through a planned development. So this really seems inappropriate to say you can't request it through a PD, which is where you create your own zoning, but through a PDO you can request a reduction in parking. So that's the second option, or excuse me, the second recommendation. The third one, right now through the PDO process, you can actually request an increase in density in the CA zone district. And again, that should only be an option through the plan development when you've compiled enough property to submit for a rezoning, basically, and creation of a PD. And in those instances, it is something that you can allocate as what is your density. But plan development overlays stop at planning commission, so it really is not appropriate that someone today could request an increase in density through this mechanism. The other odd thing is currently in the PDO chapter is really the only place where it clearly spells out residential densities as well as floor area ratios. So we're recommending that we delete those all out of the PDO chapter and put them into the each zone district for clarity. Then as we started looking at this, the other thing we realized, to just make it clear and workable and understandable, we had different terms in each of the zone districts, so we wanted to clean it up to make sure we were using minimum lot size and minimum lot width consistently within those districts. So you'll note that that is another change proposed. And then there were some specific PDO provisions in both the CA district and the T district, and we attempted to clean those up as well. And then the next one is really about lot sizes and lot width. So I just wanted to have this slide in here to share with you. Each of our residential zone districts do have specific lot sizes and lot widths. So these are the existing information up there. Because one of the other things, so specifically in R5 and CA, these are the zone districts that do allow the 2 attached product as well as townhomes, so 4 or more. And townhomes actually qualify as either two attached units. Like I said, in the zone districts where these are currently allowed, the only option to do this type of housing product is through the plan development overlay, because in R5, we do not have a 0 internal lot line. So currently, if people want to do a townhome like a duplex or a townhome and have it to be for sale, they had to go through the PDO process. So the proposal is to add a 0 internal lot line setback for attached townhomes in the downtown. Establish minimum lot size and lot width for townhomes also in downtown. So the other thing, going back to this previous slide, in R5, existing, the minimum lot size today is 6,000 square feet. And we actually have 2,500 square feet if you want to do a townhome, and a lot width of 60 feet. So the easiest thing was to just kind of split it in half so that to create a minimum lot size and lot width for townhome products in downtown, the minimum lot size would be 2,500 with a 25-foot lot width at the front setback, or excuse me, at the property line. All other R5 areas, the townhome minimum would be 3,000 square feet for the lot size, and then again, splitting that 60 feet in half to 30 for townhomes. This is a slight increase, but it seems to be more in line with the minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet if you were doing like a single family home or whatnot. And then in the CA district, for residential uses only, as you know in CA, that we do not have any minimum lot size or lot width. So we are recommending that we actually create some when in CA it's to be developed for residential use only. And it would be mirroring basically what we have in the R5. So 2,500 square feet for lot size with a lot width of 25 feet for townhome product. And that would be downtown. And then we do have some C, as you guys know, west of Santa Fe Drive. And in that case, residential only, we would be consistent with what's in R5, the 3,000 square feet and the 30 feet. So then we did do an analysis of what are all the R5 lots. So I provided you with that handout in front of you. And here it is up on the screen where we looked at all the lot widths of the R5 districts. And it's hard to see, but the average is like 109 feet, and the median, which means the middle, is, what is that one? 91. So meaning that the middle, if you take out the ends, the average existing lot frontage, or excuse me, lot width for R5 is 91 feet. That's throughout the city. Downtown, wanted to give you that more detail for here. And here, the median, meaning the middle, is 50 feet. So based on this information, that's how we're proposing the changes to the lot width in the downtown for R5. CA also has some similarities in that it has some smaller lot sizes. And so that's why we're proposing CA in downtown to mirror the R5 option, and then the CA on the west side of Santa Fe to mirror the R5 in the rest of the city for townhome. So as you know, we had a study session with City Council and Planning Commission. We did post the proposed changes on Littleton Plans, which is our city website, for community input. We did receive several comment letters. Those are included in your packet. I do not have a slide for them, but you had them. And I can answer any questions if you want on those. And then here we are this evening for a resolution for a recommendation on these proposed changes. And then next steps, it does go to City Council. And with that, I can take any questions.
Just take your time. Questions for staff? Dan, you want to start out this time?
I know you guys talked about this last month, right? So, yeah, so I was kind of trying to play a little catch up, but you answered, I mainly just had questions why. You've answered that about the residential zones, why we're eliminating it. And just to be clear, I guess the other big thing I was questioning is a PD allows for flexibility. Is that what I'm understanding? So if you want, you know, if a transit-oriented or transit, you know, the light rail station develops and there's a desire to reduce the amount of parking there because there's public transportation or cars in 20 years, maybe there's going to be more share rides and maybe the demand for parking goes down. Is there still flexibility in the code to, or are we going to be sort of stuck in I guess a set parking count?
Well, that's such a simple question. No, just teasing. Not at all. Several things. First of all, to do a rezone or to create a plan development or PUD in other jurisdictions, in Littleton's code currently, we have a section in the code saying that we actually cannot provide any reduction in parking through a PD process. The only option you have right now is through a PDO process. Now, the code does allow like shared uses and some other flexible, you know, sort of flexible ways to look at parking within the parking code, but the only option right now to reduce the number of parking spaces in exchange for architectural elements is through the PDO process.
And that's what
Parking code is on our list. We do need to make some updates to that section of the code. So I wouldn't say it's happening tomorrow, but that's one of the next things we're probably going to be working on, and we'll be presenting ideas to council and to you all.
Okay. It just seems like it's a tool in the toolbox and for this flexibility, and I guess that's what I'm hearing, that we're not going to be as flexible
So we'll recognize that what we're saying, what the proposal is this evening is to remove PDO option from the straight residential zone districts. It's still an option in the commercial districts as well as the CA district. It's just we're saying that it may not be the best to allow it still in our residential areas.
Okay, let me see here. I had some other questions. So I agree that the allowable density should reside in the individual zone districts. I think that makes sense. The only other question I had was about minimum lot size. It looked like the code originally specifies that minimum lot size occurs at the front setback. And it looks like we're striking that. That may save a phone call, because I know if we lay out residential lots in unusual shapes, we end up having potentially lot sizes that are narrower. So I think I just wouldn't take out the either front setback or the lot width at the front setback. I also had some other language here. You know what I mean? You're kind of striking out.
Correct.
Yeah.
However you all want to proceed is fine. I just want to make sure. So the reason we're doing that is the goal is to create some consistency of street frontage as you go down a street. So right now, you could have a pretty narrow lot frontage based on how this is written right now, you know what I mean? And we would just, if we measure it at the the front setback, sometimes that's 20 feet. So the first 20 feet could be smaller. So the goal is at the street, at the front, and at the width of the property, right up to the street. This way you keep that consistent.
No, I agree. I think we were just striking out, like minimum lot size says width, we struck out at front setback is 300 feet, for example. I'm just saying, I think we ought to keep in that specific, that it's the minimum lot frontage or at the setback. Because I know I'll call and go, really,
Right, so what we're saying is we're taking that out, so it would be the width would have to be at the
front. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It sounds like you're taking that out. It's being struck.
No, because right now, right now, it just says you have to be 300 feet at that, whatever that setback is. So if it's 20 feet in, you have to be 300 feet. But at the street, you could be smaller. I know. It's not really in how people do zoning codes today. You don't typically measure the width at a setback.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Go ahead, John.
So by elimination of the residential R5 from PDO, for lots that are less than 60 feet, what would be the biggest change towards future developments on lots that are less than 60 feet with this revision?
All the existing lots that are less than what's already the minimum today, nothing really changes as far as their option. The option would be that you cannot ask for a PDO on those properties. So if you're in downtown, let's just say, and you have an existing lot that's 50 feet, and you wanted to do a 2-unit attached product, then we are proposing changes in the code that would allow you to do that type of building, if you will, and at the end of the day would create 2 lots of 25 feet each, or minimum frontage, and 2,500 square feet for size.
So it wouldn't substantially hinder the types of developments that we're seeing going in R5. They would just be allowed in a different manner.
That would be true. The one thing, let's just say you had a building and you were finding it difficult to meet in this R5 existing lot, the side yard setback. Because right now, you can bring a PDO forward, for example, to reduce the setbacks. So your path would be, you could potentially apply for a variance to, change the size or the width of those setbacks. There would have to be a hardship. So it makes you still have the option to do 2 units, a duplex. You just have to fit within the parameters of the R5 zone district.
Okay. So your internal zero setback, that's like between the 2 units?
Correct.
So the side setbacks would still be?
Correct, yes.
In effect?
So the zero internal would be when you are doing an attached product, right? A duplex or a townhome.
Okay.
And they're structurally attached.
So zero lot lines would not be allowed with adjacent?
External.
Yeah, with external.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
David?
So, to be clear in my mind, in the R5 district, removing the PDO option does not eliminate the PD option if somebody needs some flexibility, not including parking. Go ahead.
So in order to do a plan development in Littleton, as long as you can compile enough properties together to meet that minimum, then yes, you could basically rezone it from R5 to a PD. That's correct.
Give us that square footage, please. I think it's 250 or something.
I think it's 180,000.
180,000 square feet.
180,000 square feet.
180.
Yeah,
180,000 square feet?
that's correct.
Okay. And are we, as part of this process, not necessarily today, planning to change the way the PDO is defined in Littleton so that it is an overlay versus just a free-for-all?
Yes, eventually that is on the list. Again, once we do that's a bigger conversation in that whole context. So once we do the vision, update the comprehensive plan, have some future land use map, then we can really have a conversation about the zoning districts, all the performance standards, this option, the PD option, all of those in detail. Discussions at that point.
All right. And over time, you see it here on Broadway as kind of the commercial area, maybe I'm saying this backwards, but as maybe the desire for commercial space expands, you see residential properties become commercial properties. And in Littleton down Curtis Street, I know there's quite a few of those. Used to be single-family homes, now are businesses in some cases. Is there a mechanism down the road to change residential to commercial, or are the districts that are currently R5 will always stay R5 and never have a business allowed on those?
Well, I think, again, right now, the only way to have a commercial use is when it's allowed, and there are some allowed in R5, so we do have that in some areas in downtown. But yes, to your point of this is a great conversation that we will have at some point about, do all the uses make sense? Are these all the zone districts? We have a lot of residential zone districts, and they're all very similar if you start looking at them. But not changing any of that for now, but certainly in the future, those are all fair conversations to have, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Bruce?
You mentioned, you got pictures in here and maps and so forth and so on of R5 and CA. Where do we have a T district, a T zone, transitional?
I'm sorry I didn't bring my zoning map. I do know we have a bunch of it along Littleton Boulevard.
Yeah.
There's some transition areas.
Okay.
That's the one I can think of off the top of my head.
I've got one here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot to look, quite honestly. Is that where they are?
They're on the zoning map, yeah.
Okay, all right.
You have now official zoning map, right?
That's right.
Okay, it's okay.
Although our copies are still unofficial.
Well, that's true. We'll
Need
make
new
sure to
ones.
get you, right, once we've got that.
There's some on Santa Fe, just to the south of downtown.
But for the most part, this is a cleanup that's
Yes.
covering that as well.
Yeah.
And so I guess a couple things. I wanted to thank the city attorney for the context. That's helpful. We've been, again, speaking for myself, I mean, we've done PD, PUD, PDO, rezones, et cetera, and they all, the nuance that you offered for context is rather helpful in terms of how to logically look at these things as opposed to, we sort of traditionally, I think, thought in terms of interchangeable parts, which isn't exactly accurate, notwithstanding maybe it was by virtue of the way the code was written. I guess so essentially with the widths and the setbacks and so forth and so on, you're stipulating in here what those metrics are, but we still, somewhere else when you get into the actual zoning sections that talk about the specifics of a given zone, it then delineates again whether we're going from what the foundation or the porch or those kinds of issues. I didn't necessarily see those in here, but maybe I'm not looking in the right place.
So as far as what can be located within a setback, is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
well, in other words, if it's, what'd you say, a 25-foot setback or 25-foot width or something.
Right. So yes, so at the moment, the way the code reads, it says any part of the structure. So that means an eaves or deck. So right now, all of those elements have to be outside of that. So they can't be closer than, if the minimum front setback is 20 feet, nothing's in 20 feet.
Okay, but
Everything starts from there back.
But and so essentially, all of that information plus the widths, where are they here? The densities and the minimum lot size and the lot width and so forth and so on, all of that then is in these 10-2 code sections that stipulate what, it's a one-stop shop for that zone. You don't have to go searching. That was sort of the intent here, was to get it all in one location.
Yes.
Once, clean it up and it's done. Okay.
So, and again, not to add too many things, another thing on our list, the list of development standards that we want to clean up is pretty long, but another one is the definition of structure. So that will be another one on the list as far as coming back and making some tweaks to that.
Okay, all right. And so we're not really, I guess the way to interpret this as well is that if somebody has property and they want to do something on their property that's used by right, what is the implication of changing the minimum lot size if it's an existing lot? This only applies if you're starting to accumulate lots for purposes of doing a project. Is that the way to do it? If I own an R5 lot, I'm going to have to, if I say I want to scrape my house and put up another house, now I've got to comply with whatever's in here once we change it, or once council, I should say, changes it. And so then I would be bound by whatever the minimum lot size and the width and the setbacks and so forth and so on would be. So essentially, we are sort of reconstituting some of these zones a little bit.
We are slightly, for purposes of doing a duplex in R5, a duplex or a townhome that you wanted to do for sale.
On
If
one
you wanted-
existing parcel, if you
Right.
if you wanted to subdivide it.
Correct, yeah.
But
So
if you want to just put a larger house on an existing parcel,
then what?
Then
Nothing?
nothing has changed for you.
Okay, so there's no implications as far as use by right for somebody who wants to do a project on their parcel and doesn't affect?
And even including if it R5, a larger lot that allowed you, let's say, 1 or 2 units, you could build 2 units. You would just have to keep them under one ownership.
Say that again?
So you could, today, you could do a 2-unit house, or excuse me, a two-unit project on an existing R5 lot. And if you didn't want to create a separate parcel, if you will, you could do that today, and that doesn't change under these proposed changes.
But you'd have to own both and
Correct.
rent one to.
Yes. Yep.
You couldn't sell and.
That's correct.
Sell title,
So-
transfer title.
Right. So right now, the only way to do that is through the PDO process.
Which you're
Which
modifying.
Right, which we're saying you're not going to be allowed to do that in R5 anymore. So that's why we've made some changes to the setback requirements.
Yeah.
And the.
Internal
both
lot
the- Yes, and then the lot width as well as the size.
Okay, all right. Lastly, I don't know why this is on. You've got the 2 graphs on this one handout you gave us. And it's less than a minor point. But the third bullet on the graph says normal distribution. I'm pretty sure those aren't normally distributed. I don't know why why that's even on the graph. It doesn't really mean anything.
The line
agree.
is,
Huh?
the line is a normal distribution.
Yeah, no, okay.
I think that's what it's a technical GIS term. You're right, but in fairness, we could have removed it.
Yeah, well, okay, it's
Just on
not
how
a
they
normal-
created
okay,
that's
it's not
correct.
a normal distribution.
Not normal in the
just-
sense of the.
Yeah,
numbers,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay, fair enough, thanks.
I'll clean that up.
Could you describe what would fall under, say, a hardship? You know, the concern being that if you remove our present PDO, if they have to go for a variance, it has to be a hardship.
So yes, in the zoning code, you would have to look to Chapter 11, where it talks about Board of Adjustment and variances. So that's what I would let's see. Do you want me to read it? Is that what you're saying? Okay. Let me find it here. So 10.11.1B is variances in our city code, and the Board of Adjustment may issue a variance where, due to exceptional and extraordinary circumstances, literal enforcement of the provision of this title will result in unnecessary hardship. Every variance granted is not personal to the applicant, but shall transfer and run with the land. No variance shall be authorized unless the board finds that all of the conditions exist. And then they have 5. That the variance will not authorize the operation of use other than those specifically listed as primary permitted uses for the zone district in which the affected property is located. That the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or zone district in which the property is located or substantially or permanently impair the allowed use or development of adjacent property. That the variance is the minimum that will afford relief and is the least possible modification to the provision in question. That the variance will not adversely affect the public's health, safety, and welfare. That the hardship, if any, under which the variance is sought was not created by the owner, occupant, or agent of the owner of the property in question, nor was it suffered as a result of violation of any provision of this code.
It does give some additional options from, even if we do remove that from the PDO then. It's just there's just those requirements that they are then required to prove. You had mentioned about potentially in the future changing the definition of structure. One of the other concerns that was brought up in some of the emails was our definition of structure. And they brought up like a basement window well would affect the setback. I'm guessing something along those lines would not be considered a hardship.
It honestly depends on what the application is.
Okay.
It's hard. They're all case by case, really.
So that is a route that they could come through with something like that.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Like a clarification on the minimum lot requirements for townhomes that are zoned R5 in the downtown area. It says sort of at the top of page 15, lines 1 and 2, it talks about lot size and lot width, but there's no mention of the setbacks and how we're creating a potential for a zero lot line within a potential development site. And
It's
perhaps I missed
supposed
that
to-
somewhere
I think
else.
we've got it miss.
I caught it too.
Numbers.
We've got a problem there. I'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So save that one for later, I suppose. Then
Yeah.
and this is primarily aimed at the downtown area, is what I'm gathering. Although it affects R5 throughout the city. Is one thing I noticed in reviewing some of the other residential sections of the code, like R3X and R4. You know, R4 allows townhomes as well, but there's no option for a 0-foot setback. So if someone were to try to do, say, a 2-family dwelling or a 3-family dwelling in R3X, or do a townhome in R4, it doesn't appear that we're offering the option of a 0-foot setback that is allowing individual property ownership among the townhomes unless you go the condo route. And so, yeah, so beyond the scope of this change then, okay. I guess one other person had questions about the front yard setback and, you know, identifying lot width at the front yard setback. I've seen that used in a lot of communities that have curvilinear streets and a lot of cul-de-sacs, so that when you have a lot on a cul-de-sac, you're not limited to that. You know, it's only about 18 feet wide just to accommodate a driveway, and then you have this wedge-shaped lot. I will say that for most of the lots in the R5 area, that, you know, those are set up on a grid. They're pretty normal and rectangular and probably unaffected.
Right, and also remember, we still have in the code that predominant front yard setback, so that's also still a requirement in some areas.
Sherry? Questions? Okay. Greg?
Of course I do. Can you hear me okay now? Okay, thanks. Thank you, Jocelyn. Good explanation. I appreciate it, Steve. Since I haven't been involved in this discussion, I know a lot's gone into it. I don't have too many detailed questions. I see a lot of good language changes in here that are attempting to update the code, and I think, you know, make it more applicable, useful, and so on. I know that we're in the process of initiating a comp plan update, long overdue, and I'd wonder what the urgency is to making these changes now before that comp plan process has a chance to run its course. Are there other examples of where, Jocelyn, I know you mentioned that a developer had mentioned, you know, a loophole there perhaps that could be closed through this language change, but are there other threats that this should be pushed ahead more quickly before the comp plan, or would it make some sense to have it tail with other code changes after the comp plan?
It's certainly a point for conversation. We do believe to the point of how busy it is in the city with development and redevelopment and infill, it's at the busiest point in its history. So the urgency is really about trying to make this more workable for people, as well as to make sure that the projects that we're seeing really fit within the intended zone districts and those requirements. And then really leaving this, because honestly what it is, it's a way to provide, not that it's necessarily negative, but it does allow you to not have to provide any hardship and get reductions in parking and reductions in setbacks. The other piece I would say, at least in downtown, I know there's been a lot of conversation around parking and the challenges that we have in the existing downtown. And it is often one of the things that people are looking at and why they're interested based on our parking requirements. And through a PDO, you can request a reduction.
And just one more question. I see that in each one of the residential zoning category, well, actually all the zoning categories, you've added the density line, which is consistent with what I've seen on other zoning codes. But you've left the minimum lot requirements in place. Is there, and the density target that's in there is often a calculated number like 17.34 or something, where I'm used to seeing them at like a round number like 18 or 16, or I imagine that's calculated based on the minimum lot size. And
So really good point, and to your point, the idea here is not to change a lot of content. It's really to make the minimum changes necessary to make the PDO more workable, as well as to make townhome and other attached products that are allowed in the residential districts to be able to do that through just creating setbacks and making that process much easier for people to create a project that's a permitted use in those zone districts. So it really isn't about changing those minimums as much as we can. And remember that the density and the floor area ratios, they are in the code. They happen to all be in the PDO chapter, which I thought was one of the weirdest things when I first got here, is that I actually had to look in the PDO chapter to figure out what the zoning was in R5, and that just seems like illogical, as well as really hard for anyone trying to understand our zoning code, like where to look for just some of these basic things that really should be in the individual zone districts.
thank you. I have no further questions.
Just to follow up on one of your questions, why we've been looking at quite a few of the tweaks of the zoning code, and they're going to come rapid fire. I think you mentioned there's 15 or 20 more. We'll be doing one every three months or so. This should have been done 10 years ago or longer, 20 years ago, but past staffs that basically, quite frankly, been sitting on their thumbs. So I think it's coincidental that we're doing it now, and as well as reworking the comprehensive plan. So, like I say, needs to be done. It should have been done a long time ago, so now we're doing it fine and dandy. My questions are mostly about the ordinance itself. Page 6, you crossed out the final PDO plan. I mean, we look at a PDO plan, and there's not another PDO plan that's final. Isn't what we look at final? Is that why that's crossed out?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Next, well, you described, I had a question about the width of the front setback versus just the at the width of the lot in the front itself. So you answered that question. Pardon me, I'm going to scroll down here. Page 13? Yeah, page 13. Towards the bottom, maximum height of structure. This occurs a couple of times. A wall 20 feet, structure 2 stories. Was the definition of a wall, is that just a parapet type structure with no sloping roof? Is that what wall means?
Oh, good point. No, we intended to delete that and just say maximum height is 30 feet, because I honestly couldn't tell you.
What the wall, well, there's a tweak for the future.
Yep.
Let's see. Then this is the one that was, I think Jason alluded to it a little bit. Page 14, C, minimum requirements excluding townhomes. You list all the requirements, heights, setbacks, minimum lot width. Then you get into D for townhomes. Well, the one before is excluding townhomes. Then you get into D, which includes, that is specifically for townhomes. It only talks about the minimum lot size, minimum lot width. And then the one below it, E, is zoned R5 in all other areas except downtown. The reason you kind of boxed yourself in here, when you're talking about D here, you need to expand that to include what is the setbacks for the townhomes? See what I'm saying? It's incomplete because you've excluded them in the previous and the one after.
Yes, we could add, I mean, I think the way we were intending to write it, but I agree it isn't very clear, was the one below governs all of them, but yes.
But
You're saying to add the building setbacks up.
Just need to list it like you have in C and E.
Yep.
I'll be offering that as an amendment, unless somebody puts it part of the main motion.
Yep, so that's the page.
Last question, that's it for that. Legal definition of townhome versus condo. I've always been told that a townhome, the legal definition is you own the property that the unit sits on. A condo, you do not. We allude to townhomes quite a bit. Shouldn't we just, instead of townhomes, just call them like 2 units or units?
Yes, Mark, we probably need to, yes, at some point we do need to clean this up more. Right now, we do have a definition of townhome, and that in our code is a single-family dwelling unit with a private entrance, which is part of a structure whose dwelling units are attached horizontally in a linear arrangement. But it doesn't give you a number, or on how many. So basically, if you have 2 attached products in Littleton, that's considered a townhome. We don't actually have something called a condo in our code. So yes, eventually we'd like to create how that should be laid out. But right now, we're not proposing to change that.
We didn't have condos in the early 80s, okay.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's, you might want to clarify that or visit it at a later date. I have no other questions at this time. Any other questions of staff?
You may want to check. I thought condo got discussed when council went through construction defect legislation a couple years ago,
It may be discussed in that legislation.
Yeah, and you might just be able to reference hypothetically, just a thought. I don't know. You have to look at it.
We can certainly look at that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
One other question.
Go ahead.
Page 5 of the proposed ordinance, section 1098, review procedures, letter B, coordination with Historical Preservation Board for properties either within a historic, move my note here, historic district or have been designated as a historic landmark. It appears we're crossing out items 2 and 3, and could I get the backstory on why? We're taking
Because we made some changes to number 1 there, which basically is the process, so that so this is coordination for property within a district or have been a designated landmark, that the Planning Commission shall refer a review of the architectural design to the HPB through the COA process.
Okay.
So the number 2 and 3, these we're talking about process, so we feel we've cleaned that up and say you got to go through the COA process.
Which I totally agree. I think item 2, I know HPB would welcome a preliminary review. So I don't know if that's a developer's option, but certainly the HPB would encourage preliminary review.
I would think then in that capacity, that's probably another thing we should add to the list, because that probably should be irrespective of this code, but really when we look at all COAs, I think is perhaps what you're offering, that might be.
It's the mixed use project, that the developer went through the whole process, came in with the COA, and then it was like, oh gosh, they had to redesign. So it's like, if you came in earlier and had a preliminary review, that would have saved staff and the candidate money.
And certainly as part of like pre-application processes, we look at more than just the land use part. We would look at the historic preservation part as well. And before it comes in for the certificate of appropriateness process. It's just that we wanted to clarify the code and make it very clear that you are going to go through the certificate of appropriateness process. It isn't going to be sort of this going back and forth, because frankly, what ends up happening is we end up with a second board that isn't quite sure what it's supposed to do with this. And we'd rather have it very straightforward.
Any other questions of staff?
I have one further question. On page 20, line 21, as compared to line 8 on the same page, seems like usually the definition maximum floor to lot area ratio FAR 3:1, but on line 21 it just says maximum floor area ratio. So that doesn't look consistent.
Page 21, is that what you said?
Page 20.
Page 20?
Line 21. Probably should say maximum floor to lot area ratio FAR 5:1.
Under B.
That's a pretty standard way of defining
It
density.
just seems inconsistent, like if you compare.
With the
it
other ones, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's inconsistent. The rest of them say,
Yep.
like on line 8 on the same page.
Oh, yeah. One or the other. Okay. Well, FAR should be just, it should be floor area ratio, period. Okay. Any other questions of staff while she's scrambling, making notes?
Just
Anything
wanted
else?
to clarify.
I'll watch the video too, so don't worry.
When you were talking about, in the study session, you talked about removing the wall, which just came up on page 13. Did you say that you wanted to remove that now, as we had talked about in the study session? It would have been line 1 and line 27 on page 13.
Yes. That, removing line 27 and 28? Yes,
Well,
that
yeah.
was just a mistake.
But you will be doing that?
If you guys want to add it as part of your motion, that would be great.
That's what I was thinking. We need to do it as a motion. Okay.
We will do it as well.
Okay. For the scribe. Okay. Okay. We ready to open it up to public hearing? Seeing no raised hands, we are. So we'll open up the public comment portion. Reiterate that you have 3 minutes to speak. When you have 30 seconds left, the yellow card will be held up. When you're 3 minutes up, the red card will go up, and you'll see the time down below me. We ask you to be civil. Please list or say your name and your address for the record. We are going to have a list here shortly. Okay. We have 2 people that have signed up to speak. First up is Bob Schwinn, who didn't say whether he was for or against it, but does wish to speak, obviously.
Hello. My name's Bob Schwinn. I live at 824 West Fremont Court, and I own property in the R5 district that we're talking about. Well, I didn't say because I kind of am for it and not for it. Obviously, I think the zoning code needs revision. I think it's long overdue, and I'm glad to see it's happening. However, I think this process is happening too quickly. I think what we're discussing today is incomplete. I have been in, I've talked to the staff, and they've told me there's going to be a part 2 to this, And I just heard Jocelyn say there's going to be many parts coming on down the road. You know, there's strange definitions in the code as it stands of what a structure is and what would go into setbacks and what doesn't go into setbacks. I understand that's going to be simplified and it's going to be clarified in the future, but it isn't being done today. Today, we are eliminating the planned development overlay, period. That's pretty much the big picture on it. We aren't replacing any variance in the mechanism. There will be no variances. You heard Jocelyn read the variance part. That was a great question that you asked, Robin. But what you probably didn't hear was the very last of the 5 clauses that need to be met is that the hardship cannot be self-imposed. It won't be allowed with it self-imposed. So any new construction would be a self-imposed hardship. And if we eliminate this PDO, there will be no variances. I think that's a mistake. Other municipalities have variances of 10 or 20% that can be done administratively. That's not here. I see on these lots, they want to split them to 25 feet. I see some 49 and 46-foot lots. I see some 73-foot, 72-foot lots that could be divided into 3. Without a variance procedure, you won't be doing that. By eliminating PDOs, you'll be eliminating the public hearings for any of these variances for all practical purposes. There was a big problem with the Grove because there weren't any public hearings. All the PDOs require public hearings. The public gets a chance to say something. That's going to take it all and put it over in the office across the street. There won't be, across the hall, there won't be any more public hearings. Just to get here in time, I think this needs to be done in a comprehensive manner. I think we need to be looking at the bigger conversation that was mentioned, and I'm afraid, as it sits right here, there's going to be some unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Pam Chadbourne.
My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here, and my relatives built the house 50 years ago. If this is interesting to you, Bob Schwinn bought the lot next to me, and that's, I think, what he's talking about. A basic principle here, folks, is that code protects current property owners and our vested rights, too. And a primary principle that I beg you to observe is that our code protects current property owners, and that if you give away rights to developers or if you over-consider inconvenience to developers over the current residents, I think you've violated a fundamental right of all of us residents here. And let me point out, this is residential. This is where people live. So this is very, very important. And I urge you and beg you to consider the impact on people who live in homes currently. I'm going to agree with Bob, though, that this is being done very quickly and that we need more understanding of the impacts. Let me say I want to thank staff for recognizing the impact on residents, considering parking, and limiting density, recognizing that PD limits density. I do have an issue with workable code. There's more than workability, it's livability, and that's what I'm asking you to consider. So I'd like you to table this to a date certain to allow staff to prepare essential information to define the impact of the change, and I want illustrations of these, folks. I cannot understand how we're considering this without illustrations. At the City Council study session, it was said we'll supply that later, and no, it has to be now so we understand the impact. You have a duty to be informed about these impacts, and we, the current owners, have a right to know. It is too impactful to bring at a session which is the first session for some new folks. So I'm very concerned about that. These are sweeping impacts, and they haven't been illustrated or quantitatively defined, do restrict the use of PDO, though, in residential impacts, and my title there is incremental change. So folks, we don't have to jump into 2040 now. We should be looking at now an incremental change to the current owners, and that's vital. Please, again, respect that. And I don't have time to talk about this, but the CAR5 rezoning was in 2015 without a planning process. Do not approve this before you drive on the 6th to 7th Streets north of Main Street and see the radical destruction of character of downtown Littleton that has occurred because of the approval of these PDOs. We inherited great zoning. Understand it and protect it. So please understand, I'm begging you as a homeowner, and I haven't done this before, and also as a resident of Littleton, I think it's best that we understand the impact before we go forward on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That's all the people that have signed up. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on the subject that hasn't signed up? Seeing, again, no rush to the rostrum. I guess since the applicant is the staff, do you have any other comments? None? Okay, we will then close the public hearing, entertain a motion, amendments, what have you, and discussion.
Can we have some questions first?
All right, go ahead. Sure.
All right. Well, I mean, does anybody else?
Well, we don't have to do the motion first. It's preferable, but if you have a question, go ahead.
I'm not sure what the motion is at the moment.
Okay, a couple questions for staff. Based on the testimony presented, can one or both of you, Jocelyn and Steve, talk about the administrative variance procedure that's envisioned as part of this process? Is it Board of Adjustment, or is it coming to, is it administrative, or does it go to, well, why don't you just talk about it?
Currently, as I read when I was giving the presentation to the earlier question, it's Chapter 11 in our zoning code, and that lays out the process for a major variance in Littleton. There is a section of the code that does allow currently today an administrative variance if it's of a smaller nature. But again, in either of those cases, you do have to look to the hardship piece.
And that would also be a quasi-judicial process. The applicant would file it, and it would be much like a zoning hearing here in front of this commission, a full quasi-judicial process based on the record, and they would have to meet the requirements of the code for a variance.
Is that, the gentleman indicated that a lot of other municipalities have codified some level of variance acceptability. Is that something you guys have seen?
Commissioner Stallman, members of the commission. Yeah, some jurisdictions, what they will have is they will have certain what they would call flexible zoning districts, where within the zoning district there is a range that you would be able to develop to. That is something that's definitely going to come out of the vision in comp plan process. We haven't looked at doing that because, quite candidly, that is a significant change in the vision and of this community that we would want to wait on until that process is done. What we're focused on, and this is one of probably over the next year 30 zoning changes that will come to you, is we don't have a workable zoning code. It doesn't function well. It's confusing to applicants. It's confusing to staff. It is not a well-designed functioning zoning code. There are a number of things in that code that we are looking at that are not what we would view as vision and comp plan related, but are simply necessary to make this code function at a minimum level. And that this is one of those where it's necessary to make the code function at a minimum level. But as you mentioned, the whole average idea of variable lot sizes, I'm certain that will fall to the vision and comp plan.
Okay. And, I mean, my interpretation of what we've read and what's been presented and discussed is that the removal of the, I don't know, I'll say unintentional use of the PDO process to effectuate what amounts to be, as you sort of described it, a poor man's rezone, is really intending to provide the proper protections to the existing homeowners and property owners. Is that a fair representation?
Absolutely. Frankly, I have a number of concerns about the process in the current code. If you look at traditional zoning law, even in this state, it never really envisioned that you would be able to somehow use an overlay to avoid minimum standards. And so, frankly, this is going to actually protect the surrounding areas around a PDO, because you now have the assurance that certain minimum standards have to be followed, where right now, quite honestly, if I have a PDO, I can toss the minimum standards out the window. Yeah. And the property owner next door doesn't know whether I'm going to do that or not.
Okay, thank you.
Still looking for a motion?
All right.
I can include an amendment on the piece that was missing in the R5 townhome, so you don't have to worry about that, but does anybody have a motion?
Well, I jotted that down as well. We can try.
Go for it.
I move to approve PC Resolution 09-2018, amending Chapter 9, Plan Development Overlay, and Chapter 2, Zone Districts, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council with the following conditions. 1, in Section 10-2-12D, add the setback and height standards from Section E to that section for clarity purposes. And Condition 2, remove references to wall and structure height in zone districts R3, X, and R4 on lines 1 and 2 and 27 and 28 of page 13.
You got it. Okay, great.
Second.
Discussion, please. Finding of fact, we call it. We'll start down here.
I have no concerns to discuss at this point.
Jerry?
To express concerns at this point. So.
We've thrown a lot at you, and it's going to be more. You're going to have to get caught up quickly. That's going to be hard work. Yeah.
Certainly. I think this is a good start to fixing the code. This does eliminate some of the potential community character issues with continually seeing plan development overlays, making changes to very small parcels in and near downtown. However, as I read through the proposed code changes, I saw lots of other opportunities for changes, some of which I mentioned, but recognize that's beyond the scope of what's being anticipated tonight. So I think it's a good start, and it is something that I would encourage staff to keep an eye on, what potentially unintended consequences could be, because on the one hand, we're taking away PDOs as an option, but on the other, we're opening up more development possibilities in the standard zone districts.
But nothing additional. I like what Jason said.
Yeah, I would agree with Jason's comments. I think very sensitive about the administrative side of the whole thing. I thought you had some good comments in terms of, thoughtful comments in terms of the practical applications where the rubber meets the road. Conversely, the other side of the coin on this thing is that with small steps in terms of changing something that has desperately needed to be changed, as Mark indicated, I think we can start turning the super tanker. The problem is if you wait and do it all at once or do a large chunk, history has suggested that those types of changes have a hard time actually getting through the process effectively and tend to stall out. So I kind of like the idea at some level, even though the unintended consequences are very legitimate concerns of actually going ahead and making some small steps and getting this thing sort of on the right road before we get too much further down that road. So I'll support this. David?
Yeah, I agree with staff that this is a necessary step of many steps to clean up the code. And I have confidence in this staff that future changes will be forthcoming quickly and will help alleviate any negative consequences. But I would definitely encourage staff to prioritize any changes that have a potential to be negative consequences of this change, to move those to the top of the list and prioritize those in that way. So that's it.
I have no comments.
I'm going to rely on the staff and Planning Commission for the work that you've done already. I still have some questions about some of the pros and cons, so I likely will be voting, no, just because I don't feel like I have enough information to be able to provide a.
Fair enough. And the newcomers, you did miss the study session we had, and plus a lot of time to go over plan development overlays for other projects. So we've got the experience. I'm in favor of the proposed ordinance changes. It's nice to be able to get rid of the increase in or decrease in the required parking. Also, not allowing the density to increase. I would tell the owners and developers that have properties in the neighborhood that you bought your lot subject to existing zoning. Live with it. There's no guarantee that you would be gaining approval with a PD plan development overlay. We're not increasing or decreasing existing zoning rights to any great degree. And lastly, I would disagree on saying we have a good zoning code. We do not have a robust, workable zoning code currently. Not that I'm saying we need more density. I just want something that's workable and readable. Vast parts of our zoning code are incomprehensible and quite frankly, a buggy whip document from a long time ago. So I look forward to the other 18 to 20.
Or more.
I'll live to regret those words, but looking forward to the additional tweaks. That's all I have. Any other comments?
One clarification, just to make sure of the conditions, you listed two. The one I didn't hear in there, and I'm assuming you want to add that, was what John brought up about on page 20, line 21, the consistent terms using that floor area to lot area ratio.
Can we leave that as a house cleaning, or do you want to, can we add that to
I'm happy to add that to the motion if my second.
We would need a second as well. Did we have a second?
Second.
We didn't have a second on here. Okay, we now do. We're now official. Sorry?
We already had a second from Commissioner Stolman.
Okay. Do you wish to?
Do I have to second the?
Yeah, do you wish to second that? We can
That'd be
then
fine, second.
Second your second?
Second it again.
Include it in the same
Okay.
motion.
So we'll delete your second. Thank
Trying
you.
to be helpful.
Appreciate that. Any other comments? If not, we will vote. We have a 6-1 in favor of a favorable recommendation to City Council. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for the presentation. Turn it on. I like keeping it up a little bit. Staff didn't have any comments before. We do have the Wednesday breakfast meeting. I don't have my calendar with me, but at what time is the meeting? It's very important. It's with our consultants, that kickoff meeting with our consultants for the comprehensive plan, so.
Yes, it's in the community room at 7:30.
I'm sorry, what time?
7:30 to 9.
7:30, okay. Hopefully you can sneak out of work for an hour or two and work late and come to this meeting. It is very important for the kickoff for the next 18 months. That's all I have. Anybody else? Comments? We are adjourned. Thank you.